Welcome back to the Piping Pastor. Thought today we'd have one of our little life chats, so no introductory slide on this one, so we're not going to categorize it and such. I'm joining you today in nearly 80-degree weather, so no sport coat, just a waistcoat and an open collar with a cravat, casual ascot, to be more specific. And I do realize that sitting in a wingback chair with a casual ascot is a rather cliche old look for a pipe smoker, but kind of what we do as pipe smokers, right? Harkening back to a time before. So, and there's nothing wrong with classic men's fashions. They're classics for a reason because they don't go out of style. They're various changes, generally when it comes to lapel width, and things of that nature, and the cut of trousers, whether it be narrow leg or wide leg, and so on and so forth, and the height of the break in the front of the pants or in the front of the trousers. So those things vary a wee bit, but for the most part, things largely stay the same. Point of fact, if you have a notched lapel casual sport coat from 100 years ago, you could wear it today and it would fit right in any casual suit setting. So, but I am smoking a Vulcan mixture today. I had decided to cellar that Burley Flake, that number 4 Burley Flake from Cornell and Deal. It's something I spoke about in a previous video. But I found it a bit harsh in the aftertaste. It was a lovely 10 note. The 4 notes are great, but just that harsh cigarette-ish aftertaste, it kind of stuck with me, even after I smoked several bowls. Tried it in a couple of different pipes, and it kind of lingered. So I'm gonna cellar it, and I'll try it again. And I don't know, we'll give it a go in about 6-8 months and see what it's like, because everything else about the tobacco I liked. But we'll see. See where that goes. I thought we'd have a wee chat today about suffering, or I guess undergoing hardships of any sort, really. One of the churches that I preach for on a regular basis follows the lectionary. It's a liturgical Protestant church, and I'm not a liturgical Protestant myself, but when I go there to share the word, I follow in with where they're going and what the church body chooses to follow with regards to themes. So they don't do topical preaching. It's largely scriptural exegesis, and as such, they follow the lectionary. So this past week, the scripture was in 1 Peter, chapter 1, verses 3 to 9, and so I decided to focus on suffering, because while I do, try to bend as much as I can to whatever church has invited me to preach, I still pull topics out of whatever it is that I'm preaching on, because I believe that's what the scripture is there for. It's there to enlighten us. It's there to reveal God's truth to us, and it's also there to inform us in various different capacities, depending on what scripture you're dealing with. And this one in particular, I really pulled suffering out of it, because this letter from Peter was written in 63 AD, which is before the really hardcore persecution of Christians really began. It really began in 64 with the burning of Rome, when Nero blamed the Christians, the Christian cult, the Jesus followers, and then really began hardcore persecution. Up until that point, the Christians were persecuted, but more in akin to being left out of social groups, being called weirdos and freaks and things like that for believing in this whole Jesus cult sect thing. So they were suffering, they were enduring hardship, but not necessarily in a really, really hard place yet. In general, I mean, obviously the apostles faced all their different trials and so on and so forth, But the Christian church, generally speaking, you get a group of Christians together in someone's house, they as a group were not facing group persecution from a government entity in such a way that would happen starting in 64 and then going all the way to 313 with Constantine. So for the next 250 years ish, they were facing hardcore persecution as a group from a government that had ultimate civil authority. But this letter was written the year before that really happened. And in this letter, Peter goes through a bunch of different steps and so on and so forth, and essentially sets up a structure, a way for them to deal with and understand suffering. So he, first of all, he lays out, who they are. He lays out their identity, as Christians. So making sure they have a firm foundation of who they are. They know who they are. They know what they believe. They know why they believe what they believe. They know what it is and the whole purpose of their belief. And then the promise of those beliefs. And then he ties it to eternal, non-transitory, non-spoilable things. So he gets basically this foundational structure for them to understand, to live in and through suffering, because suffering is inevitable and suffering comes, so that when the suffering does really hit, the church didn't die out, right? It's 64 AD, and in the intervening years, the church grew exponentially to the point where in 313, Constantine was like, okay, this needs to be the state religion. Now, I'm not discounting Constantine's vision and being spoken to in the vision and so on and so forth, but by that time, in Constantine's army, there were legions of Christian Roman soldiers. So even if Constantine had not made it the official religion of the empire, it had grown to the point where it was a force to be reckoned with in civil affairs. So during that whole time of persecution, the church grew. During their time of suffering, they were able to flourish, because before it begins, they're instructed in how to deal with it. And it got me to thinking that is something that we as human beings need to have for ourselves. You need to figure out for yourself what suffering is to you, what it means to you, and how you are going to maintain yourself through hardship and suffering. I'm not saying you have to be a Christian. You have to follow these steps that are laid out in this letter from Peter. But whatever your religio-philosophic faith tradition is, or even if you have no religio-philosophic faith tradition, if you're an atheist in the term of not believing in any kind of spirituality, because there are atheists who do. Atheism is a spectrum. Atheism are, on the one side, literal atheists, people who do not believe in a theistic religion, so no personified spiritual beings, but they believe in a spiritual reality. Taoism is the easiest example of that. There's a spiritual otherness, out there, but it's not theistic in nature. And then the ones on the farther end of the spectrum, there's no spirituality whatsoever. Everything is just firing neurons and mental capacity and physical reality, and that's it. So even if you're on that side, then there's Stoic philosophy, that calls to higher principles of being and so on and so forth. But the key thing is to identify these steps, right? Really figure out who you are as a person. I did a video on that not too long ago. But really knowing who you are, sitting down and taking time to think about it. That's one of the benefits that we have as pipe smokers, right? Because enjoying a pipe forces you to kind of sit down, slow down, and not be busy by everything, right? Not be, on your phone with the TV in the background, or reading a book while going through a to-do list in your head, or at work with 4 different things going on. The pipe kind of forces you to slow down and maybe take a deeper look inside yourself to really try to figure out who you are as a person, what life really means to you, getting your identity squared away. That takes some thought. It takes some time. It takes some self-contemplation. But once you do that, and you kind of get that figured out, well, okay, what are my values? Who am I? Right? What are my values? What do they really mean? And pardon me as I check my microphone here. Okay. I mentioned before I've had some problems with the microphone. I didn't want to get halfway through this video and have to re-record it again. But you're really figuring out what your values are, what they really mean to you. And then finally, what your higher principles are. If you're a Christian, then that's laid out pretty easily in Holy Scripture, and whatever your denomination of Christianity is, or if you're Jewish or Muslim or any other faith traditions out there. You have sacred texts that help you outline that. You have teachers of your faith that can help outline that as well. But really figuring out what those higher principles are. So there are steps, but it's something you have to think about and plan for in advance. If you try to wait until you're undergoing suffering, until you're in the middle of hardship, if you wait until then to try to figure out what your view of suffering is and how you understand suffering to exist in the world, it's too late. Because in the midst of it, your perspective is horribly skewed. You're going to be depressed, angry, despondent. You're not going to have a straight view of the world. You're going to be distracted by all the things you're worried about. So it's a key thing to figure it out first. There's a reason that God moved in Peter to have this conversation and send this letter out the year before these persecutions began, right? So we'd have time to circulate and people would have time to think and read and reflect on it and really build their method of understanding and undergoing and living through suffering and hardship. And that's what we need to do as well. So take the blessing that is the pipe, which forces you to slow down and spend some time with yourself, and think about that. Who you are, what life means to you, what your values are, what your higher principles are, what the goal and the aim and the purpose of suffering is in your life. That way when it hits, you're prepared. Because let me tell you, anyone tells you you can live life without suffering, they're delusional. Well, that is it for this time. I shall turn my attention back to my pipe and my quiet contemplation. I encourage you to do the same. So have a great week, and as always, happy reading.